So thru is my new ride. It replaces Suburban. It's going to get its chance of hauling some chainsaws, and so I'm trying a couple of concepts. I don't know if it's going to work. I don't want to mess up the rear. So I got that bin from Walmart to put the nasty things in, like the gas can and bar oil and that type of thing. Have a look at the hill. Yeah, and we have snow. So where we're headed today is back down to Shokan, New York, down the Catskills. It's about a 3-hour drive according to my GPS, and it's going to be interesting to see the climate change between now and there. So this is New York State this time of year around where I live, and it's a different climate up here than just about anywhere else. We're at about 2,000 feet. So we've had non-stop snow and you know, at night for probably 2 weeks. I've been in that darn plow truck for what, 5 nights last week, 4 nights the week before. And then I'll be heading in to my winter shift. My first impressions of the Subaru are it's a tight handling little car. It's got that nice place to put your foot down by the controls, the foot controls. The seat holds you really nice. Has a low feeling to it. The handling is very responsive. Tight feeling car. Kind of like it. Power wise, it makes enough. You know, it's no hot rod. Not what we signed up for anyway. I'm more interested in the mileage, and that's part of what we're going to try to do today, is see what we have for mileage, gas mileage. The cargo space, minimal, but enough, and that's what I showed before. I bought that bin from Walmart, and the idea is to put saws and gas and oil so they don't destroy the interior of the car. It's a chilly morning. It says it's 14 degrees out. That's about right. You can see all the rime on the trees, all the frost. Chilly morning. Nice car, nice radio. Heater works good. I heard that was something that that wasn't a strong suit on the Subaru, but this one works great. I'm quite pleased. So first impressions, nice tight little car. I like it. I can also tell you on these 55-mile-an-hour roads, you know, where they're kind of the secondary roads, this car is wonderful. It has a really decent ride, firm, which is the way I like it, but the handling is very, very nice. Very surprised, very planted feel. And this is a car that's got some miles on it, so that's even more impressive. On the highway, it runs smooth, no vibration, minimal in the steering wheel, a little bit, but these twisty, turny Ulster County roads are right where this car shines, by the way. Gotta keep track of my GPS. This damn thing is a handler. I love it. Coming up on Acorn Hill Road is where I got to turn, so I'm going to take it easy. But I was flying before some person was crawling up my ass, so let this little thing do its job. And let me tell you what, this car is a handler. And I am a fool. And here's the famous shop where Bob's creativity grows. It is warm in here. Oh, there's my 272. We're going to take that wraparound handle off of that thing and put a normal handle on it today, and we're going to do some work with that one. But the purpose of today's visit really is to have Bob go through an overview of the Jonsered 625 thru 670 series saw and the Husqvarna 61 thru 272, and that's the generation of Husqvarna that they sold prior to the 372. I can't think of a person who knows more about that class saw than Bob, so you're about to get an idea of what that means. So we're here at Bob's place, and this is a small part of his collection. And he's setting himself up so he can go through these different saws and give us a little bit of background and a little bit of history on them. So I'll let him do the intro and the presentation, but I gotta tell you, as he said before, these are just the clean ones. He's got versions of the same saws that aren't so clean. He's got multiples of these darn things.
So do you.
Well, this is about you. It's not about me.
Well, it's about the saws. It's not about me.
Okay, it's about the saws. But the subject is going to be that 61 thru 272 class Husqvarna and the similar Jonsered 625 thru 670 class saws. And I guess those are what, 1980s, 1990s generation saws?
Yeah. It came out, well, the original chassis was introduced in the late 70s, like 77, 78.
Well, that white top I had was built in 1978.
Right. And I think they ended in 97. There was some overlap with the 371s. And okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
Shoot.
All right. We're playing today. Walt and I like to build saws from piles of junk. And there's a gazillion saws on this chassis, which we're going to call the 272 670 chassis, because they were the top two saws in both brands, the Huskies and the Jonsereds. The 162 was actually the first saw to come out. We've got a real pristine example here. This saw is not the first version of the 162, because the early ones, and on some of the white top 61s, you had a single screw right about there holding down the top, and then they went to the 3-screw setup, which is on all the Huskies in the entire family. All the Husky tops in this chassis are one-piece tops. The Jonsereds use a two-piece top with a separate piece covering the air filter. And I'm going to bounce around here and not really make a lot of sense, but we'll talk about the air filters first. Jonsered was nice to us because they used pretty much, except for some early 670s with a different filter, they pretty much used the same filter on all the saws in the model line. There's a 625, the 630 Super, and then the 670. And even though this 670 still has the a higher top than on the 630, it did use the same filter. A little note, the air filter, the actual Jonsered air filter is no longer available, but you can use the filter which is still available for the 266 and the 288, which will fit on these saws. Since we're talking air filters, we'll go, here's where it started with the 162s and the early 61s. You had this style filter with a single screw going down to hold the filter. So in addition, I mean, it held it on, but in addition to, you see now we have blockage, you know, for your intake. So you got that right smack in the middle of your intake port. When the 266 came out, and then some later 61s, they switched to this filter. That filter was also shared with the 288. And this filter, even though it's got the crown on it, which is really what makes it different from the Jonsered filters, this filter will fit under the Jonsered top covers. When they went to the 268, we had a different style filter. They had this air box held on by these clips, and underneath these clips they used the same exact filter that was on the 262 XP. So a little interchangeability with that. And these filters, you have your mesh style, and then you got your flock style. Then the 272s, at least the later ones, went to the same style filter that was on a 394, although a smaller one. 394 filter won't fit under this top cover. But then it went to that, and it's got the clamp down here to hold the filter on. So obviously, in addition to the filters, most of these you got to have different filter holders, so you can't just get a filter. So this is why sometimes when somebody goes into a store and they say, "Well, I need a filter for a 272." Well, which one? You gotta have an idea of what you're looking for. One thing that makes the Huskies different from the Jonsereds on the intake and carburation side, and we'll pull this off and show you, is the Huskies. All saws in the Husky family, you set your high idle with this thumb lock as part of your safety latch on your back handle. That's how you set it, and then of course you do that, you hit the trigger to release it. The choke is choke only. On the Jonsereds, it's more like the current saws where the choke does everything. You don't have that thumb latch up here, and you set your high idle when you pull the choke out. You set it in until you hit the trigger, it releases that way. So these are just some of the differences. All of the saws in a chassis, really, most of the guys that have been building these have run into this. You have your early style and your late style, and they're pretty much, I differentiate them by the early saws had a two-piece ignition. The later saws had a single ignition. So the ignitions don't interchange. You can't put them in the case because the cases are different. They're all still available. The other thing that is worth noting here, and you can see it real good on these two, is when they went to the single ignition, they changed the case a little bit because it's a different size coil. So you see where this bolt is on your top cover relative to this starter screw. It's behind the starter screw. Okay, on the early two-piece ignition ones, the bolt is ahead of the starter screw right here. So what that means is your top covers don't interchange. You cannot bolt the early top cover onto the later chassis or vice versa. You can get the two back bolts in, they'll go in, but there's no way to go with that second bolt. The other thing, and we'll flip them around to make it a little bit easier, is there's a difference in the height of the mufflers. When they went to these different tops, and also the later 61s went to a higher top, the height of the mufflers are different. This is the older style muffler. The new style muffler is just a little bit higher. You can actually see it as this muffler is a little bit lower than the cylinder, and this one is actually maybe a little bit higher if you include that seam. So here again, you can interchange mufflers, but if you put the new taller muffler underneath one of the older early generation saws, it's going to touch the top cover a little bit, right about up in here, and you could get a little melting. Not critical, but it's it's just something that you'll notice. If you got a real pristine saw, you might not want that to happen. These older style mufflers are not available from Husky or Johnny. There are some aftermarket ones available, so you kind of be cautious on hacking them up, even though I've done it myself, I must say. And that's kind of the top end stuff. The carburetors, everything kind of works. I don't go for the actual spec. If it fits, it fits. The Husky, some of the early carburetors, and here's an example that you can see, this 266. This carburetor is not original to this. That's why the original idle set screw is just going nowhere. It doesn't do anything. It's just hanging in midair. And this is now how you would adjust the idle on this, which is how it is on all the Jonsereds and on some of the later saws. So just some of the variations there. Jonsered stuff here, I'm kind of partial to the 670s and the 630s. There's a lot more because of the different distribution network. There's way more parts that are not available on the reds that versus the orange saws. Top covers and filter covers can't get them, no longer available. As far as I'm aware, none of these cylinders are available. If you have a blown one, you know, what can you buy? I'm not sure. I don't think the 625s are available. If you had a saw and you wanted to, what you'd have to do is you'd have to get one of the Husky cylinders and you'd have to alter some of your intake stuff. Should we go to the cylinders?
Yeah.
And we can show you the different intakes on some of these saws. There's really 4. It sounds complicated, but there's really just 4 basic intake setups as far as what you're going to need. There's 3 that use an intake block, and there's 1 that uses a boot.
Can you pull this filter? We can show that.
Yeah, of course. By the way, we should point out to everybody that it's only 27 degrees here, which is why we're bundled up today. We're going to go do a little cutting on a pine tree that blew down in last week's windstorm. This is on an early 630. These were fairly consistent throughout the model run. See, you've got a little cam there that sets your high idle with your choke lever. You know, and this gasket is common to all the saws with the 2-screw filter. Intake block. There's one intake setup that uses a boot, and this is only on the 625 and 670 Jonsereds. Uses the intake boot like you got on most of the newer saws, the 372s and the 2171s. What's unique about the 625 and the 670 is both of these, they pulse the carburetor from this port right here, and they pulse it to directly from this port with a little pulse line. The rest of them, you'll see an impulse port on your cylinder that goes through the intake block. That's right there, there, and there. And this is the earliest one, 48mm jug. All the saws in this chassis are either 48s or 50mm. This is from the original 162. And the 266 and the Husky and the 630 Jonsered use this intake setup, same intake block, same gaskets. And as kind of a weird note, the 630 Super Jonsered uses the same piston and cylinder as the original 162 SE. Husky, they went to the 266. They didn't keep using this because they had the 262, which is on a smaller, lighter chassis. So that was their 60cc class saw. Jonsered stuck with the 630 right up to 97, using that same original cylinder. It's a good running saw. The 61s have a smaller intake block, kind of an odd shape there. And this is the 268 and 272 intake block. You see a much bigger opening there. So there's really only 4. There's 3 intake blocks, there's 1 intake boot. Intake boot, no longer available. So be careful, if you rip it, you're kind of screwed until you can find one. You're out in the cold, like we are today. So that is, unless you're thinking of something that I didn't mention.
Yeah, I'm thinking, would you call a 272 with a larger bore the 5th cylinder?
Well, yeah. There's a few different cylinders. That would be same as a 268 as far as intake and port size. It's just it goes from 50 to 52mm.
I think the other thing to point out is the difference between the open port or finger ported barrels and the closed ported barrels.
Yeah, you know, these are the two. We got 2 examples of the open ports. There was a 61, and this was the 61. This actually is the 61 that came off of this, which now has a 630 top end sitting under there. You see, these are similar, but they're not quite the same. There's a little, if you turn it around this way and look at the exhaust side, there's a little different hook to the Husky versus the 625 Jonsered. So the
transfer ports are different.
Yeah, a little bit different on the transfers. You know, in addition to the obvious change, you know, with the intake there. You know, they don't mix at all. Those saws for guys that want to be snobs and say open port's no good and all that, it's like, you know what, they actually run pretty good. You know, on a day like this, you know, you want to cut a truckload of firewood. Your work is really not cutting the wood, it's putting it in the truck.
Well, and the other difference is, like on these, is the size of the intake.
Yeah, that's kind of drastic.
It's a radical change. The 268 is quite a bit larger than the
Now coming down on
266.
coming down on the far end is an example of one of these scrambled egg saws that we talk about. This was originally a Jonsered 625. The guy, he put bad gas in it, it wiped itself out. So I wanted to make a little project saw out of it. He had smashed the back handle here, the trigger wasn't working at all. So what I had to put together, it now has a Jonsered 670 top end. I didn't have a red tank at the time. So what I used, I had a tank from a 268, so that's why you got a Jonsered with a Husky tank on. And everything fits. But the thing you have to be conscious of is the Husky tank really has to use the Husky handle because the Jonsered tank is a different molding and these bolt holes are farther apart on the Jonsered. So that's why in addition to putting the Husky tank on, I actually had to put the handle on to match it. So getting back to what we were saying before, you know, you got this two different ways now. This is the only saw in the collection where I can set the fast idle two different ways. I can do it the Husky style with the thumb latch, or I could do it when I pull the choke out, Jonsered style. Obviously, if you were going the other way and you put a red tank on a Husky, you'd have no way to set your high idle without changing the carburetor and stuff. So this thing, it's kind of ugly, but I played around with it and it actually runs pretty good. We got plenty of compression. So this gives you an idea when even if you don't have enough parts, you can still get a run saw together. Everything can kind of be made to work, and you know everything will kind of fit, but it can't fit individually sometimes. It has to fit with its related components.
What he means by that is things like the filter and the air horn. You're not going to put that filter arrangement on one of the other air horns. It's just not happening. That system was designed to work together and fit together.
Another little boo-boo that you can run into, and this is a really clean 268 XP that the customer fried, and he didn't want to fix it. So it was just too clean to not fix it. So I adopted it like I do. It's like, you know, some old women adopt stray cats. I adopt unwanted saws. And
do you really want to go there? Jeez.
Yeah. No,
what
really.
happens when the ASPCA goes to their houses?
Well, yeah, right. Well, you know, the thing is, these things don't leak bar oil over the living room because I don't keep them there. But they don't have free run of the house. You cannot get the 268 XP top end anymore. It automatically supersedes to the 272 top end, and the later 272s, and any one you want to buy, OEM, has a decompression valve, which is on this, which is an original 272. You see your deco right there. What's different about this is the old style chain brakes. You can see there's a lot of material back here as opposed to right here. You can't use a deco. So you have to, because the deco is never allowed to pop out. It interferes, so you have to put the cylinder plug in there. But since this saw originally never had a deco, it's okay to not have one now. This is a good running saw. I like this one. So that's some of the differences. You can have a lot of fun putting these things together. And you have to be conscious, a lot of the parts now are starting to become NLA on these things. There's plenty of things out there, but people are not repairing these saws because of how old they are. You know, 372s are going to want to fix it, but people just don't want to put money into a saw that, you know, we're coming up on 18 years since this chassis was made, although they're still making 272s in Brazil. So if anybody goes on vacation to South America, let me know, because I'll have you pick up a couple for us. So that's pretty much the rundown.
Do you have can you give a sense of what years the models came out, so you have sort of a timeline? And also a little sense as to, as you had mentioned before, the response that Husqvarna had to competition from steel in some of the models?
Well, when models actually came out and the changes, I mean, that's kind of hard to say. You know, Jonsered kind of stuck 625, 630, 670. They stuck with the same three models throughout the run and made improvements to them, whereas Husky started changing around. The exception is the 61. The 61, you know, as they went through some of their styling things, the 61, like yours, which you forgot to bring, originally
I'll fold some in.
Originally came out with the white top, then they went to the gray top, and then when they went to the the taller muffler and the single coil and all. They went also the 61s came out with an orange top similar to the 268. But they went from the 162 as their pro stuff. They went from the 162 to the 266, then the 268, and then the 272. And the 272, I think, in my mind, was a little bit of a response. You'll notice that we don't have any stills here because we're Husky and Johnny guys. But that's not to say anything wrong with still, just that there's no stills in our life and that this is what we do. The 044 mag came out, and it had a little more power than the 268. So Husky's response was they had to do something, and then they went to the 52 millimeter jug, and that's when they came out with the 272. In my opinion, the 272, as good as it is, it's a strong running saw. And I'm not saying it wasn't as durable, but I think it's a little more sensitive to proper maintenance and adjustment. You got to keep your air filter clean because they went to that 52 millimeter, a little bit thinner walls in a cylinder. But take care of them. There's a lot of them still running, and they haven't made them, close to 20 years. So it doesn't mean. But if you wind it out too much, I don't know. And the 670, there was never, Jonsered never went to the 52 millimeter. They just stayed with the 670s right through the end, which is an awful good running saw, in my view.
Now, when did the 372 come out?
There was some overlap. The 370, the earliest one I think is 96. They started coming out. There's some that are out there with serial numbers in 96. I think they were introduced in 97.
371.
The 371,
right?
Which it's the same thing. They kind of predated it. They changed it a little bit. There was some overlap. There was still, you could still at one time you could still get 272s and 371s. 372 chassis, I think it's a better saw.
Oh, it's much better. It's
got more power. It's a little bit lighter. It's got better anti-vibe, but it's not as much fun.
Do you have a 372 cylinder that we could put side by side? Because I think one of the striking differences between the two different cylinders is how much cross-sectional area the ports.
Oh yeah, we got cylinders.
Yeah, I think we might want to put that in the video.
Okay.
These cylinders, we were talking a while back about the different generations. Now here's a 268 cylinder in a closed port. You can get an idea of the size of the transfer ports and the size of the exhaust intake. Now here is the new generation saw with a boot style intake manifold. The cross-sectional area, on the outside looks similar, doesn't it? On the inside, and there's no comparison, quite a bit bigger. And then you get to the exhaust port. There's your 268. Here's your 372s. Quite a bit difference there. And then of course there's a different design for the transfers. I can tell you just, I don't know if you can see it, but there's quite a bit difference in cross-sectional area of the transfer ports. And that's why these saws, new generation saws, just simply make more power and more RPMs. Not to mention that they're a little different bore and stroke. They actually added a little more stroke, didn't they?
On what?
On the 372. The bore stroke, it's a little bit less square.
A little longer stroke on the 372.
Right, a little
That's
more.
why same thing with the same 50 millimeter displacement, and you get a few more cc's.
Yeah. So different engine design, but just looking at the port layout and just looking at the port sizes, you can see which one's going to make more horsepower.
A lot of knots there.
Huh?
Look at the knots you went through.
That thing's running smooth.
Yeah. Okay, from the 372 to a 272. Hogging on its own saw a little more, trying to make it appear to be the faster one.
Nothing recording? Yeah. You got some bad teeth. That's why it wasn't cutting so good. I'm gonna work the rakers down a little bit first. Actually, I'm just gonna work on those teeth first. Yeah, that's what we really get. I don't know if I can salvage that one.
No wonder your chains don't come.
Yeah.
That's how.
It works.
Yeah, but doesn't it work better if you just turn the saw around in the vise?
It works just as well. I get just as much bite. To be honest with you, doing it this way. Yeah, I got that one. My chains actually cut pretty good, Bob.
Yeah, but after seeing the way you're sharpening your chain, I don't feel like I can brag about my saw as much now.
Hits keep coming. But on these right here, Bob, sometimes I hit it with that big 404 file and just take that right back. And then I take the small file and put the hook back in it.
Recently bought out another dealer. Got a bunch of his old stuff. So we have here sometime in the 80s Jonsered catalog. And in 1989 they made a change on the Jonsered 625s and 670s and the casting of the intake neck. They made it thicker. They reinforced it. And it's amazing that they do this stuff and you just don't know that it's there.
Those books are gold, Bob. 670.
It doesn't say anything about whether or not the intake boot changes. They just changed it because they went from this. They had actually the clamp instead of that stupid, this dopey thing, which was just a wire twisted on there. So when they switched to the clamp, they had to change this intake boot so the clamp would work.
Jonsered parts. That's their intake.
That's for a 630. So you read these books and you find things that you never even knew existed because there's just so many variations. Now, if you could read this service bulletin, apparently early, I didn't even know this, early 670s did not have the external impulse, with the impulse line coming off the cylinder. That is interesting. Problem is, there's no date on this, which would make it a lot more useful. But I guess, but there's parts that you can get.
The bottom line to this is where he's getting with this is if you want to convert a pulse line to an internal pulse, is this part of the carburetor is what you got to change, and they're all over the place. So this is a little tidbit of information for those who like to make scrambled egg saws. There is a solution to the problem of the external pulse line or internal pulse line. Anyway, just another tidbit. We're about done for the day. I'm going to have to drive out of here in a minute. So I think we're going to close this one up. Interesting stuff, Bob. Thank you very much for
it's a good time.
the time,
Good time.
and the information and the wisdom and all that stuff. But I still think that my chain sharpening job that you gave me so much grief about.
It worked okay. I'll admit that on the tape there or whatever.
Well, day's done. Plan her out and go home. Let the Tom figure it out, and I'll start heading home. Have Subaru take me home. I had a lot of fun. Got a lot of video of Bob talking about that series of saws, the 200 Huskies, you know, the 61s, 161s, 266s, 268s, 272s, and the 620 Jonsered, 630, and 670. Some just priceless information, and you saw the comparison of some of the cylinders. It was a good day. So anyway, 3 hours driving, and I'll be home. Put this together.